This is an exciting project I'm building here, a 135 scale Lanchester Russian service model from Copper State Models. And this particular model has a fascinating history. So let's start with a quick unboxing to see what we're working with here. So the first thing you notice when you open the box is the beautifully designed instruction leaflet. It's the kind of booklet that immediately catches your eye and has a clear layout and simple, concise steps. At first glance, everything appears very straightforward. It is well organized, easy to follow, and visually appealing. So having a quick look at the sprues, and I mean, these sprues are a complete testament to the craftsmanship of Copper State Models. Detailing is nothing short of remarkable. Considering it's a plastic injection molded kit, the level of detail is astonishing. The spokes on the wheels, for example, are incredibly precise with no flash to speak of, and they stand out as a testament to the quality of this kit. As for the transfers, there aren't many, or decals, but they are printed by Cartograph, a company known for its high quality details. So the build begins by connecting the front springs to the frame parts, which then lead to assembling the whole frame, the exhaust, engine and front axles. So throughout the build, I'll make it a point to dry fit parts before gluing them in place, and it's a crucial step. I recommend it for any model, not just this one, but it is important for the kit. And by dry fitting, it means that your potential for mistakes goes down and eliminates the potential for misalignment. So it's always best to double check before committing to the glue. The next step is the front axle assembly. Have to align everything correctly at this stage, because if you don't, the wheels will go out of alignment. And connecting the front axle to the frame itself was very straightforward, but it's important to make sure the upper and lower tie rods are correctly positioned. So I did have a bit of a hiccup with my glue running out mid-build, but a quick tip if you don't know it, if you're using a Tamiya extra thin, you can just pull out the plastic insert which is in the bottle. I pulled out a bit too much there, and push it in, and you'll be able to reach the bottom of the bottle without any issue. On the radiator, there was these huge nuggets, or just waste plastic. They needed to be snipped off. So as I added the armoured walls and the platform into each other, I noticed that there's some tiny holes that were almost impossible to locate, and the instructions didn't even highlight these. It's just a little bit frustration, that's all. It's such a good kit. It's been so well thought out. It's just one little thing they've missed, so it's not to degrade this kit in any way. So the decking, you needed to cut part of it off. Again, very straightforward, and you just need to cut it in line with the pieces that are on the bottom, so it sits nice and flush. I've got a little jig that does this, and it cuts it dead square, and that's I believe it's a Tamiya hobby knife. So here is just a case of putting on a few of the details onto the armor plating and gluing those in. And whilst the decking went on without any hitches at all, probably the hardest part of this whole kit was fitting these doors on, because they've got to be fitted on at a bit of an angle, and there's a couple of bevel edges on the doors themselves which go together. and fitting them on was actually quite tricky because you've got to line up all the hinges, and it's not that hard compared to some parts on other kits, but it was the trickiest part of this kit. And you could make a little jig, I suppose, to assist you, but you get there in the end. And adding the suspension components was a very intricate process, and this is one of the steps of the kit that makes you appreciate the engineering that's gone into not just the Copper State Models kit, but also the engineering of the original vehicle. And of course, it's absolutely brilliant seeing how these parts come together, and it gives you a deep appreciation into the complexity of the original vehicle. And of course, I think that's one of the joys of model building, is learning about the intricacies of the different machines that we make, and ones you've never encountered before. I mean, I've seen this at Yeovilton in real life, but prior to that, I've never heard of this vehicle. I've certainly don't know anything about it, but now I know a bit of history about it, and I know how it sort of goes together, what the different parts are called, and I find scale model making an extremely rewarding hobby. I find it relaxing. It's good for my mental health, and it educates you at the same time. Well, what's not to like with that? And here's a good example of bits that just fit together really well. And you've got the rear axle here and the drive shaft, and it just all clicks in, slots into place. Everything has a place, and it just works, and it's wonderful. And I've used zero filler on this kit. There's absolutely no filler at all anywhere. And parts just clipping together. Absolutely gorgeous. Plastic is top notch. It's not soft. It's just right. So assembling the turret is just pushing about 6 different parts together, including the gun, protection plates, cupola. And this part of the build was a bit fiddly, but it comes together and it all has its place. Just take your time. So once you've done the turret, it's time to move on and get the storage box on the back and any other small details. The storage box, which I initially thought had a wooden floor, ends up being locked in and mostly hidden once the model is assembled. However, these kinds of details, even when they're not visible, add to the overall authenticity of the model. And throughout the build, I was continuously impressed by the finesse of the plastic parts and the lack of flash and the lack of cleanup that's required. It just meant you could get on and build a model really nice. And it's just so fine. This plastic is so fine. It's fantastic. The unditching boards are supplied in plastic. They use these to get the vehicle out of ditches and muddy situations. But it's quite straightforward to just ditch those and put real wood on. So I use a bit of balsa wood, and just shimmy the edges down, cut that to size, use the original pieces of plastic as a template, and just stain that up, and it's going to look like a real unditching board. I just used regular wood varnish and darkened them up with that and sealed them in. That does the job. So here I'm just showing the fit on these wheels. Now these wheels have been cut straight off the sprue, and then just look at those spokes. I mean, this is injected plastic. It's not a resin 3D printed kit. This is fantastic. So here we are, we're moving on to prime and painting. And I use Mr. Colour Primer and some leveling fluid to prepare the model for painting. And it was Mr. Colour Primer 1000. Thin this down, put on a very thin coat initially, and if priming helps the paint stick, and it will prevent problems later on, especially if you're masking up. If you don't prime, sometimes when you're unmasked, you can pull the paint off, but priming just helps everything adhere to the model, so it's very important to do. So here I'm painting the wheels. Basically I'm painting the tyres, and I'll get back onto the wheel frames, and I was painting those white because they had white rubber originally, and it wasn't black because that was imported in from the Americas later on. But originally those early vehicles had white rubber, and I used SMS Aggressor White to paint those tyres white. I then used that template, which is a circle template. You mask it off, and you can just spray it and get the colour. And these wheels come with these tiny brass valves. They're not brass, you paint them brass, but you insert those in, and look at the size of those, and that detail is really worth doing if you're able. It is difficult. I used a piece of yellow tape there to keep the parts on so they didn't fly off. So I've sprayed the model with red primer, and then I've used hairspray as a chipping medium, and then I'm going to apply olive drab over that. And then once I've done that whole vehicle in the olive drab, and I'm going to go back and highlight some of the panels, and I'll do that by adding a drop of white paint into the olive drab, just to lighten it a bit, and then highlight the panels, and it gives depth to the vehicle and gives it a bit of contrast. This helps make the model look more realistic, of course. So here I am, I've wetted the paint, and now I'm using a bit of moistened toothpick or cocktail stick, and then I'm scratching and chipping away to reveal the red oxide underneath the model. It was a bit tedious, I let it go a bit too long, but the result is well worth the effort. It gives the model a worn, battle-hardened look, adds to its authenticity wonderfully. And here's the results of the first lot of chipping on the olive drab. So the next stage is to put a single transfer or decal or marking onto the front. I've applied a little bit of clear gloss varnish on just on that bit where I'm going to put the transfer, and lay that down. Now that would have been the original British version, and the idea was that this car had seen a bit of work and was chipped up before they gave it to the Russians. So now the next part is to turn this car into the Russian vehicle. So now here I am respraying with a diluted coat of olive drab over the vehicle, and the idea is to leave just a hint of that original numbering visible. So let's see how it works out. So here I'm using some gauzy high gloss, and now I'm sealing the amended paintwork, the Russian scheme, getting ready to put the Russian decals on. And here we go. So this is the Russian one, and then just underneath it you can just see the hint of the original British decal, and that is pretty much spot on, exactly how it's supposed to look. A wonderful piece of creating a bit of history there. So now all the decals and the gloss coat's been applied, it is of course time to weather the model. One of my favourite parts, and I'm slowly getting better at it. So I started with the underside, and I used Flory's Models grime wash. I just basically layered this everywhere and lathered it up. These things were going across fields in Russia. It's quite muddy, so they would have got absolutely loaded down with mud without a shadow of a doubt. So here I'm just putting on this grime wash, and I'm just chucking it everywhere and saturating the model. And whilst it's still very wet, I'm then going to add some earth pigments into this wet liquid, and it's the earth pigment that really does the job of turning it into looking authentic. If you haven't got any earth pigment, I would highly recommend that you get some if you're into weathering your models, because it does the job and you need it. And these are VMS's spot on pigments I'm using, and that one's called Dark Brown Earth. And this is the pigment I'm using here. And chucking it right into the corners, you know, where it's all going to collect, where it's going to, you know, moving parts it'll be thrown off, but the parts underneath and all the deep crevices, it's going to get in there and stick and stay. So using an old brush, I just chucked it in. Originally I thought this was a wooden box, but subsequently found out that it isn't actually wood. It's a metal box. So I'm sort of scuffing it up somewhat. I want it to look a bit battle hardened, put some metal scratches in, and I'll paint that up slightly different colour to give a bit of contrast. It'll all look good in the end, so don't fret. And yeah, it's I had to transform it basically from a wood box into a metal one. So here I am, back with Flory's wash. I poured it into this little jar. This is part of the process. So I had to sort of basically take a deep breath and literally plunge in. I waited a long time before carrying out this stage. So continuing with adding the details onto the vehicle, trying to add some splash mud effects. You can imagine this thing driving along at probably 10 or 15, 20 mile an hour, wherever it went, going into a ditch full of mud and water and splashing right up, and other vehicles going by and then covering it. It would have been pretty dirty, I think would be the word. But it's lovely doing this and seeing everything come together, and it's just a wonderful process. Weathering really is good. So I'm just using a toothpick and an old brush that I've cut down to be a bit of a stubble, stick that in, and then just literally flick it on everywhere. And of course you need to cover all angles, all surfaces, and the bottom is going to be more covered than the top, of course. I hope you've enjoyed following along with the build. It's been very rewarding and I really did enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Enjoy the pictures Please like and subscribe, of course. Cheers then. Bye bye.